Yep, we can see. All right. Thank you so much, Julian. Um, where was I? Yeah, this is me. These are my projects. Um, I don't really have anything else to say that's not text here, I guess. Um, so this is the story of Exalt. How uh it came to be. Um, yeah, just go to the next slide. We'll just roll. Exalt was originally called Awake, because I thought it was cool to name a game after a code function. Um, I started this project in January 2018. I had just this was my second project in Unity Engine, and I had like just gotten uh, I just dropped a visual novel project when I realized that visual novels have like zero gameplay code, and I got really bored. Um, and content creation is miserable, and I want to make features. I want technical challenges. So I decided to try to make an action RPG. I had just I was a big fan of Hyperlight Drifter, as we'll talk about later, and so I decided like I'd make something loosely inspired by it, visually and gameplay wise. Like an action, like 2.5D adventure, but this time I wanted to make the game with like actually 3D physics. So you'd be exploring like a pixel art, like 2D art world, but everything would be 3D because I thought that was really interesting. And it would also be some technical challenges that I could show off at internship interviews, and um, that turned out pretty well. I will say it was not a great technical foundation for the project, as we'll start to see later, but it was something interesting I could talk about and land internships at insurance companies. Very exciting. Other things that Awake was at the time is I wanted to do like sci-fi with fantasy elements. I was a big fan of like not just Hyperlight Drifter, but also like Destiny 2 and Mass Effect, and those also influenced this game. Um, I also initially wanted to have like co-op and like AI NPC friends who would like fight alongside you, and you could like manage your party, and it would be like all real-time combat, and that never made it into the game. You can go to the next slide. First big inspiration was Oblivion 2013, movie that I don't know if anybody else saw, but this was really evocative for me for some reason at the time. I think I really liked the soundscape. It does have a pretty banging soundtrack. And the mega structures were just really cool. I really like a huge triangle in space. And also when the moon is fucked up. It also had a godlike AI supervillain at the heart of the like as a main antagonist, and the plot was kind of uh, entirely surrounded with the foundation where it was entirely the foundation of the plot was basically like, oh, you've been told a lie all your life, um, and like a big reveal in the middle when you realize that the whole like setting, everything that we were told in the uh, beginning of the movie was all fake, and I'm not gonna spoil more than I already did. Uh, Go watch Oblivion. It's got Tom Cruise in it. You can go to the next slide. Other one, Hyperlight Drifter, obviously. I've been very on the nose about this one. I really liked the hard light glowy swords and stuff. The mix of like modernized pixel art with like gradients and stuff. That was a really interesting aesthetic for me, and so I kind of took that and ran with it with Exalt. Combat was fun, and also more I didn't really touch on this here, but also Hyperlight Drifter was one of the first games that I realized, like, oh damn, people make video games. Like they don't just like descend from the heavens, like and into the lap of the gamer. It's like something that people make. I remember seeing the Kickstarter for Hyperlight Drifter and being like, oh shit, you can like see them like changing how the game works and like drawing stuff for it. And I don't know, that kind of stuck in my brain for a while. Um, and Hyperlight Drifter also has this like difficult to articulate um kind of lonely solitude, like adventure, kind of sad like vibe to it as you're like going through. Kind of hard to articulate why exactly. There's definitely some of the narrative like elements of it um go that way. Um I was also inspired by its complete lack of text in the narrative. Despite the fact that there was no text, it was still really like punchy and impactful, and it made me feel things. TM, and that was something inspiring that I wanted to draw from for Exalt. You can go next. Some other inspiration. I was a recent enough Reddit atheist TM where that was like a big enough part of my identity, and I kind of wanted to make a game that had that as one of the themes. What if Satan was good? This is something never done before. I also really liked aliens. I had some designs for like these squiddy aliens that I wanted to get in. A lot of the really early concept art for the game depicts them. They never got anywhere, unfortunately. But honestly, fortunately, that would have been a real pain to animate. But also, other inspirations, like I've said, are Destiny 2 and Mass Effect. Primarily, these manifest in the elemental subclasses in Exalt. You can cycle between 4 different elements, and they have different like traits and stuff. And in Mass Effect, I was really inspired by the biotic combos introduced in Mass Effect 2, where you could combine certain biotic effects. I think it was like if you did like a damage over time effect and then like an instantaneous effect, they would combine and have a huge like reaction, and that like set and spike sort of gameplay loop was really interesting to me, and I wanted to um, explore that. And that's kind of where the cursing and triggering curses aspect of Exalt comes in. Um, for those who have played it, you can go next. Um, so yeah, here's some early Awake stuff. Left, you can see some of the early concept art. Um, a lot of those visual elements, like the very rectilinear, like right angles everywhere visual style, and like ominous doors and big um, rectangle stuff is still represented in the full game right now. I also really liked that um, seeing like the ring around the planet from the planet's surface itself. That visual motif is pretty much all throughout the game. Um, as are the glowy swords. I don't really have anything else to say about this slide. We can keep going. Awake became Exalt. And you can see some of the visual evolution here. I kind of settle on some different other visual elements. For example, I added gradients to surfaces where that were like programmatically done to help illustrate the 3D-ness of the world. Um, this was like that was like a technical challenge that I really wanted to explore and solve. How to like visually communicate that an environment is 3D and have that be intuitive to the player um, without like cheating. Um, and so I did that through a combination of like using drop shadows and this gradient effect that you can see in the center, where like things above you have a bluer hue. And it didn't work super well. People still got confused, but it looks cool. Um, let's see. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. I'll talk about the more technical details later. This is a long video. This is the full demo as it was in 2022, or more realistically, like 2021, because I didn't really work on it for a little while. Um, we're not going to watch this whole thing right now, but if people want to see it later, it's here. I'll share these slides publicly with the group. Yeah, you can see the main menu is identical. For those that have played the game recently, it looks exactly like this right now. Um, uh, don't bother. We can go ahead. Thank you. Are you able to advance to the next slide? There you go. Yeah, a big break happened. For like a couple years, I kind of stepped away from the project. In early, I want to say 2021, uh, me and my friend Davis started working on a little side project called Camera That Bleeds, which is a noir horror mystery game that kind of slowly took all of my attention creatively for several years, and that we got that through the RIT's Magic Maker program. Um, it did pretty well there. We got some awards from like the Intel University Games Showcase. We started shopping around to publishers. Things seemed like they were going great, but then like publishers just did not get back to us, or were like, "Oh, this costs too much money," or "Oh, can you work on this some more?" And but this isn't a postmortem for Camera That Bleeds, so I'm not going to get too far into that. Um, but that took up most of my creative energy for a while. I still like noodled on Exalt for this duration, but most of it was just like little tiny things here and there. Also, transition happened. Yippee. And that also took a lot of my time and energy. And I got a new job at SkyMap Games, where I currently work. And I really like it. Thank you. I love Camera That Bleeds. I would love to talk about this at the time. Um, but yeah, got a job at SkyMap. But also started taking my time for a bit. But eventually, with Camera That Bleeds having failed as well, and having desiring a creative outlet outside of work, I decided to pick up Exalt again. Go to the next slide. So I returned to Exalt in early 2023. I took like a sober look at it. This was probably like the soberest I have ever been about the game. Um, I looked at it with pretty clear eyes and was like, yeah, this is never gonna satisfy me. I like recognized in myself that making something small out of this game will be disappointing, and making something big is just going to cost me too much. And like, what would that serve? It just didn't seem like it seemed like a lose-lose situation for me. But so I decided to cut my losses, scope down, ship something quick, move on. I figured, I can get this done in like 6 months, right? Um, Despite that, as I started working on it, I could constantly feel the like pull of wanting to make the bigger game Exalt, what Exalt wanted to be ultimately. There were so many features I had made and not acted on. There were like things you could push around. There were like different puzzle elements that I was doing literally nothing with. There's so many like creative goals that I wanted to do with the project that I was just not executing on. And I just had this nagging feeling that like, oh, come on. What if you spent a little energy and like made it something really cool? Like, come on, you've been working on it for so long. So many people have like built up expectations for it. This is all in my head. Um, why not? What's another couple years? You can go on to the next slide. Spiral occurs. One of my friends got involved because he wanted some narrative design work. Another friend got involved, wanting something to work on music for, and that kind of made me like want to scale it up, because I was like, oh, I have a narrative designer on the project. I can like book some story. I can make some content. And the thing with narrative is that narrative design makes work for everybody else. This is true for like most disciplines, but wanting to create things to have story in just requires me to create a lot more content. Um, but that was exciting to me at the time. It's really exciting to start promising like really exciting, cool ideas and like planning to deliver on them, because you start imagining like, oh, what if we did execute on this thing that we definitely can't execute on? Um, and yeah, I wish I could share the enormous, ridiculously huge design doc that we drafted. But it's gone. I might have like deleted it in a like mental breakdown at some point. Which is a shame, because it's a really cool artifact for like how just like down the rabbit hole I got in like making this game huge again. Um, and I don't know why I fell into the same pattern, but this game just does that to me. It's just it constantly wants to be bigger than I can make it. That's something that you're gonna see going forward. You can go on the next slide. So My plan at the time is why not make something with this, cool game foundation that I have. I decided to pivot. This is not going to be Earth. There's not humans. We're not going to have AI. I'm going to focus on having sentient celestial forces represented by the different um, elements that the player swaps between. You're going to like unlock the elements as you go through the game. You start off with the red element, iCore, and that's going to be like thematically relevant to like the story. Then you're going to like discover other ones as you like explore the world. Through like soul and void, you'll learn different things about your past and like what soul and void mean. And then like you'll have some like self-discovery thing with like the storm element, and then you'll go and fight God TM at the end of the game, and yeah, you can skip ahead. Um, oh, this is what I just said. This is just more of that. You can see a hint of the game design doc on the right. That's just like a part of it. Um, that's just the story part. Um, yeah. Anyway, we can skip ahead. Um, eventually, towards the end of 2023, I had a moment and was like, where basically what I did was I like stubbed in gray box levels for like the entire like arc of the game. And then having like playing through that and realizing the volume of work that needed to be done to like make all of that polished and like interesting was like just such a monumental amount of work that it was just not going to be possible in like a reasonable amount of time. And it was just too overwhelming. My brain just could not wrap itself around the amount of work that needed to be done. So I decided to refocus. I decided to, and this is where I sort of developed the work backwards model, which I think worked really well for EXALT. Where I would start at the very final like part of the game, the final boss, which is like a pretty cool like set piece thing that I was excited about. Then I'd work back from there. If I still had any energy to work on the game, I'd make the like dungeon leading up to the final boss. And then if I did that, I could work back and like do the mountain scene that builds up to the dungeon that goes to the final boss. And then I could, work backwards. And at any point, I could quit the game and be like, okay, this is like a cohesive thing. Um, it may or may not be still confusing because it starts in the middle of like a narrative, but at least it's all cohesive and it has interesting parts and it has an ending. Um, and that was a pretty decent approach, even though I kind of only did the final boss and half of the dungeon. But working on the final boss was, I think, a really good idea because there's a really strong. Actually, can you go to the next slide? I forget if the next slide talks about the final boss. No, go back, actually. Um, yeah, final boss was really cool. That was really fun to work on. It's a really impactful narrative moment, at least for me, understanding its context. And aesthetically, it was really interesting to work on with like the sky and the stars and the lightning blowing up the huge crystal deity thingy, and the big lasers happening and like the freeze frames and I don't know, a lot of really interesting technical and artistic challenges. It was probably the funnest time working on EXALT. You can go to the next slide. Shit goes bad. I decide to continue working on the game. Continuing to work on the game feels horrible. Even working on just the dungeon, I am constantly feeling overwhelmed and creatively dissatisfied. I like try to implement a like platforming challenge, but because of how frustrating my great boxing tools are to work with and how difficult it is to make art for the game, I just kind of collapsed repeatedly. Like again and again, I would like just give up, and then feel horrible about the game. And then I'd like start daydreaming about it and getting excited about it, and then overscoping it again and working on it again, and then being it's just this constant cycle of like getting excited, trying to execute on it, feeling overwhelmed, and crashing again. And eventually, you can go to the next slide. I just give up. At some point, in like November of 2024, I'm just like, fuck it. I'm just gonna release the game as it is now. there was like an active bug that I was working on at the time, and like I didn't even bother like finishing my work on that bug. I was just like, I'm shipping this game as it is right now, um, and I'm not touching it again. And uh, that's what I did. Haven't touched it since. Feels great. Um, and you can kind of see, kind of transparently in the itch page for Exalt that I don't feel super awesome about it. Um, but nice comments from some people here even. Um, I got 3 people paid for the game. I made a whopping $47, which is about like 2 cents per hour spent on the game. Pretty decent pay rate. Games pays really well, guys. But earnestly, the coolest thing was seeing in the bottom right here. There's a YouTuber in I think like Japan who like picked up the game and like played it for like 50 minutes and left this very charming review, and that was really special for me. Like seeing somebody across the world play the game, and thinking it was interesting. I don't know. It just hit a certain way. You can go next. So why did Exalt fail? This is where I'm sure everybody's gonna be like, "Oh, come on, Exalt is great." But for me, Exalt was a failure. And I will explain why I think that here. You can go to the next slide. So one reason Exalt failed is bad thoughts TM. Specifically, bad thoughts that I had at the start of the project. I think a lot of amateur artists, developers, kind of go into their field already with strong opinions about the field. People who, you don't go into games without having played a video game before, typically. Typically, you're like an avid fan of video games, you have strong opinions about like, difficulty in Dark Souls or something like that. And then you enter the workforce, and you're like, you bring those opinions with you. And then, those opinions tend to break against the reality of game development. Games is complicated. Game developers are not lazy. A lot of common cultural opinions about like how art is done and how games are made are like just wrong. And that's something that you only learn by doing it. But despite that, I'm going to go through some of the sort of neuroses that I had at the start of the game that kind of attached to the game and made it kind of impossible to continue working on, just because in some way for me, um, these thoughts were inextricably tied to the project, and working on it would make me think them. You can go to the next slide. First one is I can do everything, therefore I can do everything. Basically what I mean by this is, so I fancy myself like a jack of all trades, a Jill of all trades, I guess. And like I like doing art, I like doing engineering, I like technical problems, I like sound, I like design. And so at the start of the project, I decided like, hey, I could do all of this stuff. So why not just like make the whole thing by myself? Like if I technically am able to execute on everything, then surely I can execute on everything. And I think working on this project solo was part of what like crushed it. I think working on small projects, working on projects with like small teams can really, it just kind of feels good. There are different problems that you encounter. Like obviously you have to like juggle tasks, align on creative vision, but with Camera That Bleeds, I remember having a really strong back and forth with my friend on that project, Davis, where when one of us would feel down about the project, the other would reassure them and be like, "Hey, come on, we're working on something cool." Or when somebody would get too excited and start overscoping, the other person would be like, "Hey, cool your jets, buddy. Like, remember what we're trying to do here. Let's be realistic." And lacking that, definitely after working on Camera That Bleeds, and enjoying that process, coming back to Exalt, I definitely felt that like vacancy, that like kind of bad solitude TM in working on the project. Um, so if I could do it again, I'd probably involve other people on the project earlier, or at the very least, decide to be more realistic about what I can do by myself. You can go to the next slide. This is another bad thought TM, is that EXALT needs to ship. And like, I think this was planted in my brain early on when I was telling a figure I looked up to about the project and what I wanted to do with it, and he was like, "Dude, you're never gonna finish this game," and that stuck in my head. Like that seemed like a challenge to me, and I was like, "All right, I'll show you. I'll finish this game." And also, I remember there's been some at varying points in games industry culture, there have been conversations about like finishing games, having mountains of unfinished projects. And I remember seeing that and being like, well, I want to be different. I want EXALT to be different. I don't want to just be another one of like hundreds of games that people just, kind of leave on the shelf and don't come back to. That would be like a failing for me. And so it kind of got in my brain. I need to finish EXALT. And I need to finish EXALT. You can go to the next slide. Not only do I need to finish EXALT, but it needs to be huge. This needs to be my magnum opus. I need my first game to be my magnum opus. This is, I think, a lot of people, a lot of new developers, a lot of new artists tend to have this pattern of thought. Maybe it's just me, but I really wanted EXALT to be something huge, and that was not something that I could like pivot away from. Like I always felt that pull to make it bigger. And like there was a sort of perverse like death drive at the core of EXALT where working on it more and like scaling it up like and looking at like okay, this is like way too huge to execute on. Like just the fantasy of like failing to execute on it even and having such a dramatic tragic story to tell at a postmortem, for example, um was like enticing to me. It was like cool to like fantasize about like feeling sorry for myself and making something like huge and failing to execute on it, but having such like cool stuff having done in the process. Um, I kind of like intentionally shot myself in the foot multiple times, like in working on this project early, just because like I like really wanted something dramatic to come of it. Um, whether that was a good thing or not. You can go to the next slide. This is another bad thought. I definitely had some lazy devs opinions early on, specifically with respect to like Hyperlight Drifter. I remember playing Hyperlight Drifter and being like frustrated by certain parts of it, specifically with like hitboxes for attacks like being slightly misaligned with art. And this is on its face a really interesting and kind of intractable problem with 2.5D games. The like sort of top like the 45-degree angle perspective where like you can see the front and the top of like a cube, for example, is a charming aesthetic like in like Hades, for example. But the positioning of like collision does not one-to-one match with the visuals, and like because you're essentially like your shadow is your physics volume, but like your sprite extends past the shadow, and so if you see a projectile which is some distance above the ground and it's flying towards you, how do you know if it's going to hit you or not? And so these games tend to be really hard to read in those sort of minute circumstances. And so I really wanted to solve that problem. And it's an interesting problem to solve, but some part of my conception of that problem was wrapped up in this like lazy devs mindset of like I can do it better than they can. I don't care that they have many games under their belt and there's a ton of like very smart people that worked there. I can figure this out. You can go to the next slide. And finally, good art is painful to make. This is, I think, also extremely common in pretty much any creative field, as a mindset, not just in amateurs, but also in some veterans who have, I think, poorly developed conceptions of the artistic process and like what it means to make good art and why art is hard to work on. The fact of the matter is that projects, like big creative projects, are just hard to execute on because it's such a huge undertaking, and there are going to be points along the way where you second guess yourself, um, and like, or you try to do something and it doesn't come out the way you wanted it to, etc. The fact of the matter is, the pain isn't what makes it good. It's just incidental to the process. It's something that sucks, as it turns out. And, but it's a sticky concept to think like good art is painful to make. There's something narratively compelling about, the process being, arduous and difficult and taxing, but worth it nonetheless. And I think a lot of people can sort of take that and get it backwards and think, oh, well, if good art is painful to make, then inflicting pain on myself is going to make my art good. And I think I remember seeing this a lot in like the labs at RIT, where people would like brag about like basically torturing themselves, like being like, oh, I was up until 5 a.m. last night working on this project, and like having um, competitions essentially with other students about how like hard they were grinding themselves down for their projects. And it's just such a toxic mindset, toxic culture, um, and it will ultimately destroy you. It's a reason why burnout is so prevalent, and um, but it's compelling, and it's hard for me to let go of this concept, especially working on EXALT, the like sort of the valorization of the agony of the process. So yeah, I can go to the next slide. Another reason, crazy ambition. This kind of like is something I already talked about, but the appeal of making something huge is kind of taking debt out of the future. You are basically buying short-term excitement and like good feeling, and then paying for it tenfold down the line when you try to execute on it and fail to do so, or realize that you can't actually do this crazy thing that you really wanted to do. And this was a thing that definitely happened with EXALT. Early in the project, all throughout the project, in fact, I was constantly like, "Oh, this game's gonna be so huge." This time, I have imagined the like huge game that will be good and that I will enjoy executing on. And um, tied up in this is promises not just to yourself but to other people, and being like, guys, I'm working on something really cool, and and that feels really good in the short term, but it you become indebted to delivering on that, or else you're not going to feel very good in the future when you deliver and it is not very good, or at least you don't think it's very good. And now, when I have this impulse to talk about how exciting like mech repair game is, for example, I have a nagging feeling at the back of my head, like, uh-oh, this feels like EXALT, derogatory. And honestly, it's probably a good reflex to like not want to feed that, wanting to temper your expectations, because I mean, obviously, it can go south pretty quick. It's a difficult balancing act. Being excited about your project, but also being sober and realistic about what's good to expect. Not wanting to expect too much of yourself. Managing, you know, your energy level, and I don't know, rambling. You get the idea. You can go to the next slide. Um, Another huge issue is poor tech foundation. Content creation for EXALT was a miserable process. This is a combination of tools and also mindset, because mindset informs like the process, obviously. My like everything must like this has to be like all this art needs to be done by hand. Everything needs to be hand authored and painstakingly done. Um, just kind of fueled and formed the foundation of like how I designed like every system of the game, especially for like level art. And so, in having lackluster tools to create content that ground the iterative cycle to a halt, I basically waterfall approached like the entire content creation process where I would design it all on paper, I would implement it, I would art it up, and then I would play test it. And then only at the end would I realize, oh, this needs some work. Um, but then to rework it would be to have to go through that whole process again. This huge, painstaking hours and hours, days and days process just to test it again. And that really just made it impossible to make the game, essentially. So have good tools. I'm a big tools enjoyer now. I can go to the next slide. And I was really fixated on this 3D, 2D concept. There might be a good game at the end of following that path, but I kind of found something else interesting that I wanted to explore instead. And as a result, the game kind of has this vestigial, like 3D aspect to it that's really awkward. Like in playing the game, there's a jump button, but it's like, why can I jump? Why is there verticality at all? It interacts with the combat really weirdly. It's not fun in platforming, um, and so it just kind of takes away from the game as a whole. I think um, it's a pattern I've seen in myself is that engineers, in particular, IMO, have a habit of being like fascinated by things that just are not interested to like the average person. Um, you have this like like making an entity like component system, for example, like the process, like you understand how complicated it is and how useful it is, but like the average person is just like, okay, I just see like 1,000 spheres on the screen. Why is this interesting to me? And like, so I think it's easy to fixate on problems and like puzzles that just aren't don't have much like gameplay potential. And I kind of wish that I caught that early on and decided to change the game as a result because it would have made the game a lot easier to make. Um, and I can't really fault myself for having done this. I mean, it did land me some internships. I don't know how much making a 2D, 3D physics system is responsible for landing those internships, but it was definitely a thing I talked about a lot, and it seemed to get a lot of attention. So, at least as far as a portfolio project, this maybe wasn't as much of a failure as I'm uh, lambasting it for. You can go to the next slide. Exalt's gonna haunt me forever. The themes and concepts and images and the whole game is something I'm going to that's going to sit with me for a while, and that I want to come back to eventually. There's some really compelling stuff here in the gameplay loop as well that I would really like to explore more. But I just need some time away from the project because I can't work on it in like good faith. I can't work on it without like spiraling into those same patterns of behavior. And I'm hoping that just some time away from it will give me some clarity and allow me to come back to it with sort of a different perspective. Um, but that's for another time because after crashing on it in November, I was kind of worried that I lost my passion for game development for a bit. Um, I still carry a bit of anxiety about like what if I never ship a game ever? What if I can never like execute on like a project? And um I don't know really what to do about that other than execute on a project. I will say that my new project is something mech repair game is going really well, and I am excited about it, and I do think it is something that I can execute on. But there's still this nagging feeling at the back of my head, like, what if Exalt happens again, man? Um, and there will always be a little grief about the amount of time that I spent on the game, um, the amount of time that I could have spent doing other things with my life. Like I remember looking back through my devlog messages and seeing times when I wish that I had spent like the past couple weeks or whatever, um, going outside, hanging out with people, um, instead. And um, this is like a common thing in games. I think possibly in creative fields generally, is the sense that is the pattern of like people work on games for years, and then they the game stops. Everybody gets laid off. The game stops getting funding. Runway runs out. Whatever. For one reason or another, it just doesn't come to be. And I don't know what we do about that. We have people whose whole job it is to um, make sure the game runs well, make sure the production process runs well, and despite that, you know, games are just so volatile. It's a miracle that any of them get made. Um, and yeah, I don't know, much to think about. Next slide. Accomplishments. I'm realizing we're running out of time, but we also got a late start, and who cares? Feel free to drop off if you have other stuff going on at any time. But we're just going to go through some cool things that I did. Hopefully, you have access, Julian, to all of the assets. You can go to the next slide. Yay, it's working. Okay. First cool tech, this depth shader. You can see like in the area below, it's like really dark, and then when you drop down, the area above you gets light, and this was a really cool thing to work on and see working, and I think it really ties the aesthetic together. Really proud of that feature, and it was kind of one of my first steps into tech art, which is now like my favorite field. I really like making shaders and stuff like that, and this kind of jump started that. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, this was a fun problem too. I wanted projections not just for shadows, but also for early on I wanted you to be able to like cast runes on the ground, and like it would have like an area of effect. And so this is just some tech to like let you project that. And it interfaces with my like weird 2D 3D system, and yeah, that was just cool to work on. Really weird and expensive to run algorithm. Like every time it interacts with like an object, it creates a new sprite and it like clips it out. Um, but it looks pretty smooth. Um, and yeah, really fun technical problem. You can go to the next slide. I really also enjoyed making these sort of hybrid animation and programming little scenes. Like this, for example, I wanted a scene where like this like big evil super weapon obelisk thing like cracks the ground, and like you can see the crust like bursting up with my like rectilinear style. And I actually like implemented like an algorithm to randomly determine like how high each chunk of the earth would like rise over time, to make it look kind of like like inverse squared like height. And it was really fun. It's so enjoyable to make these like where tech and art meet is just like the funnest place to work in. And I remember how satisfying it was getting this to work just for this little background cutscene that happens for like a couple seconds. You can go to the next slide. Exalt is juicy as fuck. This game feels really good. And I am really proud of how good combat feels. This is just showing you getting the shit beat out of you, but you get the idea. You get hit, the whole game freezes for like a quarter of a second, and I don't know, making combat feel really punchy, having like hit stop and flash and different visual effects to really sell the weight of impacts. Was just really fun to work on. This is some of the most enjoyable work was with the combat system. You go to the next slide. Oh, this was really fun too. I made a system to procedurally generate like these lightning arcs between 2 points, and you can like define like the amplitude and like frequency of the arc at different like at contiguously along the arc, and um, I use it all over the place. It's really fun, and this was another fun tech art thing that I made. This algorithm for like procedurally generating the like mesh um, for these lightning bolts. That was really fun. You can go next. This was a really useful Greybox prefab tool. Without this, I probably would have quit the game earlier. So I'm actually kind of mad at Dane for making this for me. But yeah, he made this really useful Greybox prefab tool that like on the left, like everything is made out of the same prefab, and he made all these utility functions that like change the scale and like elevation and stuff like that, and it was really useful. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, getting background parallax to work was pretty cool too, and like slowly figuring out how to work with that system, and like make cool vistas with it. There were so many vistas that just didn't make it into the final game because it didn't make sense to put them anywhere, and like this is one of them, and they're pretty cool. All right, next slide. I'm just making you all look at random cool shit that I made. This was also instrumental in like actually arting up some of the environments. Um, this was one of the tools that I mentioned, added far too late in the process, and this was not enough to make the process like actually worthwhile. But you can kind of see, I don't know if you can actually tell like what's happening here, but it takes like the whole level or like a section of like objects in the level, and it bakes all of that to like a sprite sheet that represents like a top-down view of what the level looks like, and that makes it so much easier to like create the art assets for the level, because beforehand I would have to like figure out the dimensions of like each asset in the level and then place them in a sprite sheet relative to each other like pixel perfectly, and if they were misaligned at all I'd have to like redo the whole thing. The process was horrible, and this process is still pretty bad, but it's a lot better. um and It was really cool to work on. It was something that really revealed to me how much time you can save by making just like a tool that takes maybe like a weekend to put together and saves you immediately like weeks of time. Um, yeah, that's kind of all I got there. You can go to the next slide. Oh, I didn't put the finished version of the but some of you have seen it. If you haven't seen it, you have to play the demo. I apologize in advance. Making this like shatter freeze frame effect for the final boss, which is entirely procedural, as you can see like on the left, was really fun. Figuring out, I don't know, like I said, making this kind of like hybrid programming and like art, um, different things for like weighty, like cinematic slash emotional slash narrative moments is just really fun, and I want to do a lot more of that in the future. Next slide. No, very sad. um, oh, how quickly can we do this? Share. How fast is Google? Let's go. Yeah, this was really cool too. I have some like uh what is it? UV offset stuff going on here. So like make the screen look shattered, like and glass is refracting. You can see like if you look at the enemy in the top right corner, it's all like warped. Um, and yeah, I use this in the final boss. As the screen gets like more and more cracked as you lose more and more health. That was really fun. And you can go on the next slide. I think this is probably the last one. Yeah, takeaways. Next slide. First of all advice is bad. Be careful what. Try not to take too much advice from like individual projects. So much of like my complaints are unique to me and my experience and like the problems that I had on the project. Um, every game is its own exception. Especially success stories are all exceptions. Um, everyone who's succeeded in making something is exceptionally lucky, and um, it's just as easy to make a bad game as it is make a good game. Blah blah blah. That's all. Next game. Next slide. So this is a weird one. Um, don't overscope is something I was told a lot early on, and it's kind of a killjoy of a thing to tell someone, especially like as a response to like something that they're excited about. Um, and so I think um, I don't know if this is still something that people say reflexively, but I would caution people to try to think of a more constructive way that doesn't sound like, just kind of being dismissive of someone's exciting idea to frame what you're trying to warn them against. Um, I don't know if this would have saved me. If I'm being honest, I probably needed to have a horrible time making a project to really understand that you can have a horrible time making a project, but I would like to encourage different framings, especially for people who, um, like, I don't know. One angle that's maybe more useful is like lean on your strengths as an indie. As an indie, you can take bigger risks. There's not as much weighing on your project. You can do weirder shit that AAA games can't do because they need to sell like 10 more billion copies to the median voter. So get risky with your mechanics, get risky with your the narratives that you tell, your aesthetics. Um, do unique stuff. Um, Also, lean on tools. There are, like I mentioned earlier, tools can really accelerate you. Don't like get caught up in like, oh, I need to do everything manually. Tools exist to make your life easier, and having a good tool will make the game better because you can make more stuff faster, you can improve on it faster, and yeah, tool's good. Thumbs up emoji. If you ever think, should I make a tool for this? You probably should make a tool for it. Um, and finally, understanding what scope means, because people often say it in response to like, or at least in my experience, they would say it in response to like a big cool idea, and I would understand that as like, okay, don't make cool shit, I guess. But scope typically just means like volume of content that you're trying to make. Um, and so I would generally encourage people to try to make, you know, either really wide and shallow games, like visual novels, for example, very content heavy, feature light, or some narrow specific thing, like Nair, for example. I think is a really good example of a scoped down, focused game that does one thing really well. Um, so I don't know. I'll get off my horse. Nair reference. I can go to the next slide. You don't have much time. Games take a long ass time to make. If every game you make takes 5 years, you will make 10 games ever, maybe. Um, I don't know. I don't want to get too lectury here, but it is like one big takeaway that I have from like reading my devlogs for EXALT. It's that like projects are not worth like burning your life away. Um, Go out and live. It will make your projects better. It will also make your life better. Don't go out and live for the sake of your project. Do it for its own sake. Um, and yeah, I think that's all I got. Next slide. I think that's it. Yeah, the end. Anyway, that's Exalt. Thank you for listening. Um, any questions, comments, concerns? This is chat time. Yes, please. Thank you.